Okay, so we're starting this year now in Oitzes Chaim. This is a new set of Oitzes Chaim Shirim. The last one, there was a lot of tangents and stuff going on, so we didn't really accomplish much. So over here, we're going to be, Bezos Hashem, um, going through it, you know, understanding it, but going through it at Bezos Hashem, a pretty good pace. So I guess first, just to start off, just to talk a little bit about the cipher itself. Reb Chaim Vital actually wrote the result system of the worlds 4 times, really. And they call them Medira Kama, Medira Tenyuna, Medira Basra, which means first edition, second edition, third edition, but it's not really like different editions of one cipher, because usually you have like, the first edition was like the first printing, and the second edition, the second printing, where they might have made some corrections. But this is different. Here he actually rewrote the whole thing in different words 4 times. And basically in Eitz Chaim, which is what we learn on Motzei Shabbos, in Eitz Chaim is basically Reb Meir Paparish, who's a Talmud of Reb Shmuel Vital, Reb Chaim Vital's son. He basically just put together all 4 editions, and he arranged them and reordered them and arranged them thematically and put them all together. So you will actually find the entire Eitz Chaim within Eitz Chaim. But basically the idea is the Medira Kama, the first edition, was a cipher which, like the Rashash himself says, that Reb Chaim Vital wrote it at the beginning of his learning with the Arizal. He didn't yet have the concepts clear. So that cipher is very difficult to learn. He talks very unclearly because, like the Rashash says, he didn't yet understand it clearly. And there's many things that he says there which are not exactly the way that the Maskana of the Kabbalah is. Now, Oitzes Chaim was the Medira Tanyuna, the second edition. And Oitzes Chaim is already, like, basically, more or less, just with a few little kvetches here and there, it is the system, the way that the Rizal presented it. So now Reb Chaim Vital understood it more clearly and presented it more clearly. Then there's Medira Basra. And Medira Basra is actually 2 other Sfurim, which Reb Chaim Vital wrote after Oitzes Chaim. So you'd think that those ones would be more clear. And could be they are, but they're also very, very long and drawn out. So because of that, it's accepted that if someone wants to learn the whole system and understand it clearly, Oitzes Chaim is the way to go. And Oitzes Chaim gives us all the important information. There are a few details, or really a few important details it leaves out of Oitzes Chaim, which you find only in the Medira Basra, but those, Bez Hashem, I'm going to explain at the places where they're relevant and sort of fill in those gaps and fill in that information. So Bez Hashem will do that. Now, so that's the first thing to know. Second thing to know is, and I guess everyone here, well, maybe not, but almost everyone here has a little bit of experience with learning Kisvei Arizal. The Sifsei Chaim that we learned before this really simplified it, and almost simplified it so much that I got frustrated with it because sometimes he wasn't even so accurate for the sake of simplicity, right? But so Oitzes Chaim is technical. It's a technical cipher. And so therefore, he does throw in here and there juicy little pieces of hashkofa and juicy little pieces and I'm going to bring in some juicy pieces to make it more interesting, but it is a very technical work. So it's like sitting down to learn, like Bava Basra, except that it's not talking about this world, it's talking about Atzilus. But it's a technical work. So that's something to begin with. Now, I want to ask everyone, because I know that when I give my other Oitzes Chaim shir, so a lot of people are dropping out. Some people are dropping out because there was too many questions and the questions were off topic. But a lot of people were dropping out because they didn't understand some of the technical details. So I want to ask everyone here, please, instead of dropping out, if you don't understand something, let me know, send me an email, and we'll set up a private session and I'll explain it to you. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So we just have to hold firm and hold on to it, and Bez Hashem will understand it clearly. The other thing I wanted to say is, and this is a very important hakdama to learning Pnimis Torah, is that the system is presented in a visual sort of a way, in the sense that a lot of times you'll find descriptions of things where the best way to present them is with a diagram. But we have to know when we're looking at a diagram, you know, a diagram is a two-dimensional picture. And we're talking here about a world that's infinite dimensional. We're talking about something here that's extremely, extremely complex and nothing like the physical world. So because of that, no diagram will be correct. Or you could say many diagrams will be correct. Because the idea is that the diagrams are only meant to sort of bring it down in a certain way, but we're not allowed. It's called the hakshuma, to actually think that it is the way that it looks, in the sense that the diagram is just there to show us a little bit of an idea of what's going on. And you'll find that in many cases, we'll have different diagrams that look completely differently, describing the exact same thing. For example, like one of the things that I've talked about many times by the Shirim, so many of you have probably heard it already, is the idea that up and down could also be in and out, in the sense that you could look at all the oilamas as one above the other, or you could look at the oilamas as one within the other. So you could have one diagram that shows a structure, let's say the four oilamas of Atzilut, Bria, Tzir, and Sir. You could look at it as a structure of four, like a tower of four blocks, right? And then you can make that would be one diagram. Then another diagram would be of a circle where you have Atzilus in the middle, and Bria around that, and Yetzir around that, and Asir around that. So look at those two diagrams that look completely different. They're describing the same thing. Because we're talking about a world where there's no physical space. The Zohar Kodesh says that the Olam Atzilis can't even hold a mustard seed, right? Which, interestingly enough, has a parallel, the Havdalah of Abdullah in the New Testament, which probably means that the New Testament people got it from the same place or the same Masorah that Reb Shimon had. But the idea is that it can't even hold a mustard seed, and that means to say that it's not physical, right? It doesn't have physical dimensions. So if we're trying to express distance, you could express it as from bottom to top, or you could express it from in to out, and either way, it's the same thing. So that's just an example of how two different diagrams, completely different diagrams, could really be showing the same reality. So it's important to say, I'm going to say this to everyone, you have to be flexible here, right? Because sometimes you're going to think that you understand something, and then suddenly Reb Chaim Vital says something that turns it upside down. So don't think you didn't understand it. It just means you have to be flexible, and you have to be able to switch into different ways of looking at it. It's all abstract. And Bez Hashem, we'll all get through it and understand it. And again, if you don't understand something, send me an email. I'll explain it to you. Okay. So with those akdamas, I guess let's start.
Excuse me, Rabbi, before we go deep into it, it was always my question. Did Rabbi Chaim Vital himself 100% get it correct as Arizal really observed or received from Shamayim, or it could be also just his own understanding?
So I'll tell you like this. The Vilna Gaon, the Guru, asked your exact question. Because, and I've mentioned this before also by the Shirim. The Vilna Gaon asked, the Vilna Gaon said that he explains that Torah, there's a mushal and a nimshal, right? There's a parable and then there's actual reality. So most people, 99% of people, well, I don't know if 99%, in Chitzler it's probably 99% of Klal Yisrael do not understand the nimshal. They're living in the mushal. So in the mushal, they have all the halachas and everything that we have to do and how we have to conduct ourselves, and they learn Gemara, and the Gemara explains it, and they learn Agaritas, and they run through them because they don't understand them, right? So many people don't get the actual, what's really going on. And the Guru says this, and the Guru says that he wasn't sure if Reb Chaim Vital really got it, he says, because the Rizal for sure got it, because the Rizal received it from Shemaim, like you said. But Reb Chaim Vital, the Guru was Mesipic, and then he writes that he found one place where Reb Chaim Vital says something, I don't remember what it is, where he saw from the words that Reb Chaim Vital did really get it. So the Guru said Reb Chaim Vital got it. And our whole Masorah in Pnimis Torah is built upon the writings of Reb Chaim Vital. In fact, the Rashash even said that he did not want to learn from any other place except Reb Chaim Vital. In the sense that there's other Talmidei Arizal that wrote for him, and there's other Talmidei Arizal that have different things that they wrote, and the Rashash didn't want to look into any of that. He only wanted to use Reb Chaim Vital. And there are some Sfardish Mekubulim nowadays that are makbid on this too, just Reb Chaim Vital. So this is what we're working with, and this is all we have. So let's hope that Bemis or Chaim Vital got it right. I'll tell you one thing. Ibn Chaim Vital is very faithful to the Arizal, in the sense that he will present the words of the Arizal, and whenever he has something that's his own idea, he will say, "Nearly as dati Chaim." It seems to me, Chaim, that something. So he always indicates when something is his own, and when something is from the Arizal himself. So because of that, we can trust him that he's giving over the Messiah correctly. And again, when things are a little bit choppy, then we have the Rishash and the other Mekabulim who explained what it really is supposed to mean. And sometimes we can't read we're even going to see here in the first Shar, there's certain words that we have to sort of twist around a little bit to get it clear. But Baruch Hashem, we have a Messiah that's a very clear Messiah. So yesh al mi l'smoich, we have who to depend on. So it's
Thank you.
good. Bez Hashem. Okay, so let's start. Just one other interesting thing that they called Oitzros Chaim because it was actually taken out of Chaim Vital's kaiver, out of his grave, believe it or not. Because for whatever reason, I guess maybe because Chaim Vital wasn't sure how clear he got it, I guess, Chaim Vital didn't want the Sfurim to come out. And he actually asked them to be buried with him. I'm not sure if all of this Sfurim, but Oitzros Chaim was one of them. And so this was actually buried in Chaim Vital's kaiver. And then what happened was that Reb Shmuel Vital's Talmidim, Yaakov Tzemach, and the second one, who I forgot right now. 1 second. Okay, sorry. They made a Shaar Igulim, which is a procedure where you basically. Sorry, I'm getting distracted with all the phone calls. There's a procedure called Shaar Igulim, which is a procedure in Kabbalah Masses, which usually involves saying certain psikim or doing certain things, then going to sleep with a question in your mind and having the question answered in a dream. And they both did it to ask if they could please dig out Oitzros Chaim from the kaiver of Chaim Vital. And they both received in the dream that they could. So they went actually to the grave of Chaim Vital and they dug it up, and they took out Oitzros Chaim from there. So this Oitzros Chaim was, and that's one of the reasons why it's called Oitzros Chaim, because it came, from that Oitzer that Chaim Vital had buried with him. There is a Nisach that Rabbi Sevi says. Rabbi Sevi's father was Mishamish, one of the, I think of Kaduri, I think, and he has a Messiah, he has a Nisach that the Sfurim were actually put on Reb Chaim Vital's chest, and his hands were closed over the Oitzros Chaim, or the Sfurim that he had there. And when they came and they opened the kaiver, Reb Chaim Vital opened his hands and allowed them to take the Oitzros Chaim. And they were taking manuscripts. Then eventually the hands closed back up again, and he didn't allow them to take all the manuscripts, which is very interesting and spooky sort of a story. But yeah. So anyway, so let's see. So the first shar here is Shaar Igulim. It's a very short shar, and this talks about even before Udam Kadman. This talks about the very beginning of creation. So he says over here, and again, since people are probably using different Oitzros Chaims, there will be some nischuas that are a little bit different. So bear with me. He says Hagdoma Achas. So this is a title for the whole cipher. The whole cipher is Hagdoma Achas, one Hagdoma, Gedoyla, and it's big, fair enough. Right, which contains information of everything from the Ein Sof ad Zer Anpin, until Zer Anpin. And I'm going to ask for homework, not yet because we don't need it yet, but soon. And in a few weeks into it, I'm going to ask for homework that everybody who doesn't yet know or isn't that familiar with the names of the Pretzifim should get familiar with them, because we're going to need to know these names and what they mean. But Zer Anpin is basically one of the lower elements of Olam Atzilus. The lowest element of Olam Atzilus is Nikva, right? Which represents Malchus, and Zeran represents the next 6 spheres above that, which is Chesed Gevurah Tiferes Netzach Hod and Yesod. but anyway, but and really, Derech Agav, there's another girsa here which I see here, and by me that brings another girsa that some people say there should really be ad nik dezer alpin until the malchus which is nik dezer alpin, which makes sense because it discusses everything from the top of creation, from the beginning of creation, until the end of Atzilus. And he doesn't really go into the other elements. We might talk about them a little bit at the end. So anyway, so that's the title of Oitzes Chaim. So now he says, Da, you should know. Itchilas HaKol Hoyakol HaMetzias or Pushit. At the very beginning, all that existed was, all of existence, well, if you can call it existence, whatever, was full of simple light. V'nikra Ein Sof, and that's called the Ein Sof. Right? So in other words, he's starting with the fact that you have existence, and that existence is just Ein Sof. There's nothing else. And that's, of course, infinite in all dimensions. Right? So that's the beginning of everything. So the Leshem says that the Ein Sof is really the first creation. Because the Leshem wants to say that the real Hashem himself is the Atzmas. And then the Ein Sof is level 2. It's the first thing that emanated from there. And the reason why he says that is because we can't talk about Hashem himself. We can't talk about the Elokus itself in any way, shape, or form. So because of that, we can't really, and since we're talking about the Ein Sof, and we're going to say the things the Ein Sof does, so it can't be that the Ein Sof is Hashem himself. So that's what the Leshem says. And we're going to see soon why that gets into a very important inyan of understanding the system. We'll talk about that soon, when we get into it. Anyways, that's what he says. So Tchilas HaKol, the beginning of everything, was the Ein Sof. And then he says, there was no empty space. In the sense, everything was filled with Ein Sof. That's all that there was. Everything was the light of the Ein Sof. And then he says, when it entered his mind to emanate the emanations, in other words, to start creation. And when was this? The Rizal asks in Eitz Chaim, when it entered his mind. So when was this? The Rizal answers, before that there was no time. So this could have, you can't say, oh, this was 5 minutes into his existence, right? It doesn't make any sense. It existed always. So at in that infinity, when he willed, whatever that means, when we're talking about infinity, when he willed that existence should emanate, then it emanated. When was that? Well, we can't talk about it because there's no time then. Right? We can't understand this. It's a concept that's beyond us. But anyway, that's the idea. So what entered his mind to create the creations, l'sibanoidas, for the well-known reason, and he tells us, and the reason is, lekura racham v'chanan v'giyoytze. They should be called racham v'chanan. He should have, I will explain it, right? Let's just see one more line. Ki im ein ba'olam mishei kabel racham meni, if there isn't anyone in the world or in existence to receive racham from him, how could he be called racham? Right? And so too with every other title. What he's telling us here is something we've talked about a lot of times by the Shirim too. He's telling us here a very important point. And that point is that basically the goal of all of creation was to create an other that Hashem should be able to relate to. Because Kaviyuchel, the Ein Sof itself, if it fills all of existence, it's all powerful and almighty, right? But nothing's happening. There's, it's stagnant. It's just a steady state system where nothing's happening and everything's just always the same, right? So what's the purpose of that, Kiviyuchel, if we can even say those words, right? The Ein Sof wanted to create an other in order to have an other that relates to him, and that other could call him Racham V'chanan. That other could be Makabel Toiv from him, right? That was really the goal of all of existence, was to have that other, and that other is us, right? And of course, Alpi Amkas, the way we've talked about it many times before, is that we're not really another either. It's an illusion, right? Because like we'll see over here, all of creation is just the Or Ein Sof, which just is going to eventually come down and sort of congeal into more and more separate seeming forms, until when it comes down to this world, it congeals into us. right? And we think that we have an independent existence, and we think that we're independent beings, and we think we can do whatever we want, right? But really, there is no other. But it was enough, because there's no other way to do it, kiviyuchol, whatever that means, to have an idea, an illusion of an other. And that's basically the idea of all creation. So the illusion is so good down here that there's people who walk around in this world that don't believe that Hashem exists, right? And so that was the goal. There should be an other, to be able to be makabel that racham from him. So he says, and we're not going to get into this because of course the Ein Sof doesn't need anything, right? So how can you? So like some people ask the kasha on the Rizal, how can you say that the Ein Sof needed an other? The Rizal doesn't say that he needed another. He says that he wanted another, right? He says what entered his mind to do it. So in other words, it's not a need, it's a want. And even the word want isn't good because the word want really means a need. Because, if you know in English, especially in older English, you say he has want of something, meaning that he's lacking something. But we can't say on the Ein Sof that's lacking anything. The best explanation of this is the way that the Lubavitchers for him say it, the Tanya, is that they say there was a taiva, believe it or not. Even though we associate the word taiva a lot of times with negative things, right? But taiva just means a desire that has no logical basis. Because if you think about it, like I use this mushal a lot, one person likes vanilla ice cream, another person likes chocolate ice cream, so they're gonna fight it out now. Who's right, who's wrong? Neither of them can explain to the other one why logically their ice cream is better, right? Because it's a tava. Tava doesn't make sense. So to here, it was a chayshik, it was a desire, right? That he wanted to have this other. He didn't have to have another. He could have existed forever the way he existed, right? But he wanted another. Anyway, okay, we're talking here like seriously, like this first shar, even though it's not technical as the other shurim are going to be, but it's very, very, like we're talking about concepts that we have no idea what we're talking about. Because how can you talk about any of these things in the Ein Sof? Because how can you even talk about the fact that the Ein Sof has a rutzen? Because a rutzen is already something that you think is separate. The person is separate from his desire for ice cream, right? It's two different things. But the Ein Sof, you can't have anything separate yet, right? So what are we talking about, B'chlal? So again, we don't understand these things at all, but we're just seeing the words and grasping a little bit of the idea. So he says, for us, so now in order to create this creation, tzamtzem atzmoi, he reduced himself or contracted himself, be'emtza, in the middle, or in the middle of his light. In the Kiddas Americas, in that middle point, emtzuas shaboy. Right? So again, the Sfurim asked, the Mefarshim asked, what is the middle point of the Ein Sof? Because something that's infinite in all directions, it doesn't have a middle point, right? Because what's the middle point of infinity? So again, something that we can understand. The Mefarshim is saying, it's Chaim, that the idea is wherever that point was in that infinity, it doesn't matter. That point became the middle. Because now you have something other than Ein Sof. Because I have this point, this point in the middle that where the Ein Sof is withdrawing from there, creating an empty space, right? So that point will now be called the middle because now it's the only point of reference that we have. Because then there's infinity from all sides, infinitely. So now that point of finity, of whatever, if affinity is a word, right? That finite point in the middle is going to be called the middle because now it's the only point of reference that we have. Anyway, so he says that in that place, he started reducing himself. He retracted. So picture like a point in the middle, like a point, and that then it's like retracting. The Or Ein Sof is going away from that middle point, right? It's retracting away, and Vasivas, right? So what remained was an empty space in the middle. And that was the first tzimtzum of the matzel, which is Hashem or the Ein Sof, right? So in other words, now we have basically, again, now visualizing it is not the way it really is, but you could visualize like infinity filling everything, and then one circle of empty space in the middle. Circle is two-dimensional. So you could say a sphere. Imagine a sphere of emptiness in the middle of that infinity. But sphere is also not adequate because then there's higher dimensions, right? Hypersphere, whatever it is, right? But anyway, but now there's this empty space in the middle. So over here, it's good to mention the idea that this was a machloikas by the Mekabulim from the very beginning, and it eventually became the machloikas between the Misnagdim and the Hasidim, because it says here clearly in the words that he withdrew himself from that middle and created an empty space. So then he's not in that space, right? Because he just withdrew from it. So there were those. So some people say it's simsim kapshitoi. That shita means that they hold that simsim is to be taken literally. That the empty space was actually an empty space, and the Ein Sof isn't there. And their main reasoning is because that's what the Rizal says. There's other shita that says it's simsim shaloi kapshitoi. It's not literal, because you can't really say. This is what they would tell you. You can't really say that Hashem is not somewhere, because Hashem is everywhere all the time. So even to say there's an empty space is to say there's a place where Hashem is not, and then that limits him. That makes him sort of finite in a certain sense, that he's not in that space, and that would be a problem. So other ones said since Mishaloi Kapshitoi, that it's not literal, and it just means he concealed himself within that area. So everywhere else the Ein Sof is begili, and everywhere else the Ein Sof is revealed, but in that empty space the Ein Sof is concealed. Right, so they would learn it that way, and the main machlokes between the Chassidim and the Misnagdim was that the Misnagdim believed Tzimtzum Kipshitoi. They believed that the Tzimtzum is literal and Hashem actually is not in an empty space, and therefore the world really exists, right? And therefore we're responsible for our actions, and we have to keep the Torah. We have to do Torah and mitzvahs. Right? And they held, the Hasidim didn't hold this, but they held that the Hasidim say, since it's it's not literal, so then there really was never a tzimtzum. Right? It's just a place where Hashem is concealed, but he was still always there. So in a sense, they're saying that the world is an illusion. So the Misnagdim thought if the Hasidim hold the world is an illusion, then they're going to become like Shabbos and Phoenix, and they're going to start doing whatever they want and not keeping Torah and mitzvahs, because the world's an illusion, so it's not real, so who cares? And they were pointing to things that the Hasidim did, like davening late, right? Like not putting so much of the emphasis on learning, like saying that the pushdi that doesn't know any Torah is as important as the one that does. And some tzaddikim are doing very interesting things, holding very interesting zmanim, davening mincha very late. There was some tzaddikim that they could daven shachas in the middle of the night, they could daven mincha and in the morning, and they could daven marav when it's still light outside. It was totally, some tzaddikim were very, very odd in that way. Right, so the Misnagdim are pointing to this and saying, look, it's because of this shita that they hold, the simsim shaloi kipshita, and that's causing all the problems. So, but really the truth is that it doesn't, because, like I mentioned once, we're having a shir, we're talking about bechira. Oh, this was the Chassidish Sforim shir last week, right? So I mentioned, like, if this world is real, then bechira is real, and if this world isn't real, then bechira is not real. But we all, on a certain level, think that the world is real, in the sense that no one's going to say, oh, the world's not real, let me jump off a roof. Right? No one says that, right? Everyone is afraid for their lives and wants to take care of their lives and be healthy and have a good life in this world, So as real as the world is, so real is bechira. So if you care about this things in this world, if you don't want to jump off a roof, then you have the responsibility for your actions. Maybe it's not, in a sense, it's not real. That doesn't concern us, because in our reality, it's real. It's like I just want, I don't want to get off topic, but let me just give a short example of this. It's like you have someone writing a story, right? So the author writing the story exists in a world where there's gravity, but he could write a story about a world where there's no gravity, right? And then those characters in that story that he wrote are going to be able to fly in the sky, right? He could write that if he wants, and he can write anything that he wants. And let's say he writes a story about a hero and a villain, right? So in the world of the story, that hero is praised for doing a very good job and doing the right thing, and that villain is punished for doing the bad thing that he wanted to do, right? So in the reality of the story, there's bechira. The author wrote it out all exactly, and wrote out very specifically exactly what's going to happen. So really, the villain doesn't have bechira. Okay, that's in the world of the author, but in the world of the book, of course, he has bechira. In the world of the book, he made choices, even though the author wrote that he made those choices, right? So we should look at ourselves as characters in the story. In the story, we have bechira, and we have to and we have to always do the right thing, regardless of whether perhaps in the eyes of the author, Kaviyuchol, it's just a story that he wrote, and he knows exactly what's going to happen from the beginning to the end. It's a tough concept, but something to think about. But anyway, so basically, so basically, he says they created this empty space. He says, "V'zei ha'yud tzimtzum rishon shel hamatzah." This is the first tzimtzum, because we're going to see later on there's going to be a second type of a tzimtzum. Now, this is also important. The word tzimtzum is a very important word to know, because it can be used in many different contexts. The word tzimtzum means, we're going to take tzimtzum shaloika pshitoi. It means the concealment of Hashem's light. Therefore, anytime there's a concealment of Hashem's light in any respect, that would be called a tzimtzum, right? So, for example, the Shir Sekailim, which you're going to learn about later, how the lower 7 series of Atzilus broke, is also called a tzimtzum, because it's also a concealment of Hashem's light, because those spheres that broke fell down to the lower worlds and created the klippus. So that's a tzimtzum. And when a person has a yerida, a person has something that happened to him that's not good, he got ill, chas v'shulam, or he lost his parnusa, chas v'shulam, whatever it is, that's also a tzimtzum. That's also like a hester punim of Hashem's or, right? So the word tzimtzum can be used in many, many different contexts. So we're never going to have another tzimtzum like this one. So when you see it says this, the first tzimtzum is going to be other tzimtzum, and the other ones are not going to be anything like this. But the idea of tzimtzum is the idea of hester. And anytime we see tzimtzum, we should know that means hester. Okay. So basically, what we have here is we have Ein Sof filling all of existence, then a small ball of empty space, so to speak, in the middle. And he says, "V'zeh mukam hachalal," this empty space, he igel, it was round, which I mentioned it, but he didn't mention it before, right? In the sense that the Ein Sof withdrew itself from that middle point circularly. So now there's a circular empty space in the middle. And he says this eagle, it's a circle. The very definition of a circle is from the midpoint to any point on the sides of the circle is exactly the same distance, right? So the point is it's bashua achas, it's equidistant from the center. And this is going to be important, and like the Rizal says, not here, but in Eitz Chaim, the reason for this is that there needs to be balance. So if it would be any other shape, it would be, let's say, be a triangle, you'd have places that are closer to the Ein Sof, from the middle, other places which should be further, and that wouldn't be Yosher, because the Yasher says that everything is equidistant from the Ein Sof. So that's why he made it in the beginning of a circle. He says, and the Olam Atzilus, the world of Atzilus, and really even before that, Ak and everything, and all the lower worlds, will all be within this empty space. That's where they will all be created, right? So you think about our physical universe with all of its stars and galaxies, which we know are millions and billions and trillions of light years away, are all just in the malchus of the Atzilus, right? So they're all within one tiny, tiny little, insignificant little dot of this empty space. Okay, so he says, and the Or Ein Sof is equally or surrounding from all sides of it. And he says, when the Ein Sof was mitzamtzim itself, from one side of this empty space, himshich or der kav yusher echad dak ka'ein tziner echad. He sent down into the empty space one ray of light, which was very thin and like a tziner, like a pipe. And the reason why he says it's like a tziner, like a pipe, the Leisham explains, is because every single thing that's going to exist, and there's another klal, important klal for everyone to know, every single thing that's going to exist within this kulal, this empty space, will have or and kaili. Or and kaili is the definition of all of reality, which means you'll have the physical, so to speak, aspect of it. Take in our world, right? A human being has a body, and he has a neshama. right? So that's the kaili is the body, and the neshama is the or. And every single thing in existence will have a kaili and an or. Of course, when we're talking about even Atzilus, where we say there's a kaili of Keser and an or of Keser, a kaili of Chachma and an or of Chachma, and so on and so forth, those kailim are so spiritual that to us they would not be kailim at all. They would be pure oiris, the fi erech us, right? But on their erech, on that level, there is the lower level of that light, which is the kaili, and the higher level of that light, which is the or, that's within the kaili. So that's the way to understand it. So even in this kav, which is the first thing coming down, it's going to be looked at, even though it's one-dimensional, it's a line, it doesn't have any width, but it'll be looked at as a pipe. Because we'll look at it like it has the kaili, or like the solid aspect of that ray, and then the or that's within it. It says again kaili and or. And that's the reason why it's a thinner. So this kav is coming down. Or nimshich min ho'ain sof. This or came down from the Ein Sof into the empty space and filled it. It doesn't mean it filled it. It just mean, right? The illusion is lav dafka. Because it didn't fill it, it just came straight down. Okay? And it came down almost to the other end, but not all the way to the other end. The Rizal explains in Eitz Chaim, it couldn't go all the way to the other end because the whole point, let me explain first the point. The whole point of this kav of or coming in is because the or Ein Sof. Let's first talk about the reason for the tzimtzum. Right? Why did it have to be a tzimtzum for creation? Because the or Ein Sof is so brilliant and so powerful, right? That if there wouldn't be a tzimtzum, nothing could be created there because that or would just immediately wipe it out. Right? It's like you have like a little flashlight and someone turns on like one of these massive strobe lights or something, whatever it's called. Then your flashlight's not worth anything, right? It doesn't have any existence compared to that bright light that's coming down, right? So the idea is that in order that anything should be created, that anything could be independent or illusion of independent, that Ein Sof had to create an empty space for that. And now the reason for the kav coming in is because the kav is going to now be because now you have the empty space. You don't have the building blocks to create anything because you don't have anything in that space, right? So Ein Sof now had to put a little bit of or back in, a little tiny bit of that or back into the empty space, that or should then become creation, to become all the worlds. And basically, the idea is that as the kav travels down into the empty space, it's looked at as getting further and further from the place where it started, from the source. And Derech Agav, the Rizal might say it soon, I'm not sure, but the idea is that, by the way, we call the Rizal the Rav. So if I ever say the Rav, that means the Rizal. But so basically the idea is this kav is coming down, and as it travels down, it's getting further and further from its source. In other words, it's getting more and more gashmi, kiviyuchel, right? So as it travels down, it can then unfold into different worlds which are less and less rachmi and more gashmi, until at the bottom of the kav we're going to have our physical world, which is the most gashmi of everything, right? So the Rizal says the kav can't travel all the way through and touch the other end at the bottom, because then there would not be an up and there wouldn't be a down. Or he will say this, I think, in the next page. There wouldn't be an up and there wouldn't be a down, and the whole purpose would be defeated, because the whole purpose is that there should be an up and down. There should be an idea of being closer or further to the Ein Sof. If we go all the way through, well, it's connected to Ein Sof on both ends. So what's the up, what's the down? Right? So it couldn't go all the way through, but almost all the way through. If you look in the first diagram in a Nissen Peretz diagram book, which I said that the item should preferably print out or have accessible, so you'll see that there. You'll see that the ore is coming down, a ray of light is coming down, and we're going to call that place where it's coming from the top. Because what's top, what's bottom, right? Because it's a ball, so it could be from anywhere. But that place that it came out of and started coming down, we're going to call that the top. And the place where the kav ends, that's going to be the bottom. So that's what he says anyway. So he says, Aval nishar makom puni bain haor shebetoich hachulal hazeh bain or ein sof hamakev es hachulal hazeh k'nizker. But of course, since the kav is only just coming down, there's going to be plenty of empty space around. between the kav and between the Or Ein Sof, which is everywhere, right? And that empty space is going to be the place where the worlds are built, as we're going to see soon. So he says, Shentamtzim else to the right, this Or Ein Sof that withdrew to the sides. He says, V'siyam hakav hazeh, the bottom of the kav, lamata, here he says it, Eine negaya gam kain b'Or Ein Sof atzmai. That Or of the kav doesn't go all the way through and touch the Ein Sof again on the other end, on the bottom end. Shem loy kain, if it wouldn't be like that, or rather he means if it would have been like that, right? Yachzar adover likmois shehoya, and then everything would go back to how it was at the beginning. V'yachzar v'izchaber or azay shebetoich hachula lema Or Ein Sof yachad k'v'rishoyna. That kav would just go straight back to the Ein Sof at the other end, and there'll be no up and no down. Believe it or not, the Leishim says, because we have this idea, the Rizal talks about it, is that L'usad Luvoy when Mashiach comes, there won't be an up and there won't be a down, because the whole idea of having a hierarchy of higher and lower is only something that exists until the Tikkun HaShulam. And when the Tikkun HaShulam happens and Mashiach comes, then there won't be any up and there won't be any down. And in the sense, like Ephraim Goldstein says a lot of times, I've quoted it before, that there won't be any difference between a Rosh Yeshiva and a Talmud in the yeshiva, and the cook in the kitchen, and the janitor cleaning the floor, and the cockroach eating food on the bottom of at the bottom of the kitchen. Because as long as the only reason why there's an up and a down is because there's good and there's evil, and there's people doing the Rutz Hashem, there's people not doing the Rutz Hashem, right? But once everyone's doing the Rutz Hashem, then everyone is really equal in a sense, right? That the Rosh Yeshiva is doing his avodah, and Talmud's doing his avodah, and who's better? They're both doing their avodah to the maximum capacity that they should be doing it. And the cockroach is doing his avodah by eating food and by being eaten by other animals in the food chain, right? So literally everyone's doing their avodah. So who's better than anybody else? Everyone's necessary for the system, right? So this is something the Rizal talks about a lot. Is this hashvua, this equality that's going to happen at the end when Mashiach comes. And what's it called? I want to say something else on this. I can't remember, but that's the idea. So right, so that's the result says. And this is the word with Koirach, right? Because Koirach said Kol Am Kilam Tzadik, Kol Aida Kilam Tzadikim. Koirach's whole tana was that why Moshe Rabbeinu are making a hierarchy? Why are making Gehanim, Leviim, Israelim? The Gehanim get the most covered, they get the bench, and they and then they have to give them always the first things, and they have to get the covered. Koirach said, what do you mean? Everyone, all the Yidden are holy. Why are you making a hierarchy? Let's make everyone equal. And that's why the Medrash says that the Koirach is going to be the Kohen Gadol when Mashiach comes. Right? The Medrash learns out from Tzaddik Atumar Yifrach. Tzaddik Atumar Yifrach is Soifet Taivus Koirach. Right? Because Koirach was wrong only because it wasn't the right time for that. Right? At that time, he couldn't do that yet. Because listen, Levoi Mashiach comes, that's exactly what it's going to be. Right? So the Leishim connected to this vort. He says that the whole point why the Kav can't go all the way to the other end is because there needs to be up and there needs to be down. Well, if the result says when Mashiach comes there won't be any up or any down, well then the Leishim says, you have to say that when Mashiach comes, the Kav will go all the way through. And everything's going to be equidistant. Everything's going to be chaylik of the Ein Sof, and you can't really say what's up and what's down because everyone's going to be doing their avodah. It's going to be a tikkun hashulam. Anyway, okay. So he says, Valkain, when is Pasha the V'nimshech or Azeh, V'roichev, also, you shouldn't think that this or sort of came like we just said, it's just like kav, it's a straight line down. You shouldn't think that it came down like a triangle, that it started very thin at the top, it started getting wider and wider and wider. That's what he means here. You shouldn't think that. Rak, only derech kav dak, only one straight line down. Eichad levada keniska. B'derech kav hazay nimshech v'yored or v'ain sof hamatzlan. Through this kav, the or ein sof now has a conduit into the mukumpuni, into the empty space. So now you've connected the matzil, the emanator, with a netzal, with the emanated, right? V'alidei kain mizdabkim hamatzel v'neitzel yachad v'loy oid. So now we have this connection of the matzel and the neitzel. V'loy oid. He means v'loy oid. He means all you have is the most limited connection possible, and no more than that. Because too much of a connection would just cancel the whole thing, cancel the whole system. That's why it can't come down as a triangle, because you only want a little bit of that ore, only the minimum amount that you need for those elements to unfold. So it's so yeah, it's a connection between the matzel and the netzel, and no more than that, no more ore than that. He says, "V'afal shekola atzilus he ugel." So over here, when he says the word atzilus here, it doesn't mean olam atzilus. Here he means atzilus like netzal, everything that was emanated. So he means here when he says the atzilus, he really means everything. Olam malbush, olam kadman, atzilus and bria and yitzir and yitzir means everything here, right? So he says, "Afal pi shekol ho atzilus he ugel." Even though that entire space of creation is round, but Ein Sof Mekifim called Siddha B'Shuva, and Ein Sof is equidistantly around all the sides of this empty space. Im Kol Zei Oisei Hamukam Shenishar Duvik Boy, but that place where the Kav starts, right? V'nimshach Memeni Roish HaKav Azei, and that's where the head of the Kav is, the top of the Kav is, Sham Nikra Roish Huatzilis Val Yoina. That's called the top of all of creation. Here again, it doesn't mean Atzilus Dafka. It means everything that was emanated. That's the top where that kav starts. And it didn't have to be the top. It could come from left side, the right, it doesn't matter. That place is going to be called the top, definitionally. V'kol zeh shemispashev v'nimshech lamata, and v'kol mash v'nispashev v'nimshech lamata, and the more this kav traveled down into the empty space, nikra tachtonis atzilus, that's going to be called the bottom. So the kav is getting lower. It's getting further away from the starting point. That the end is called the bottom. That end is almost by the other end. So who says that that's to be called bottom? Because it's very close to the other end. As long as it doesn't touch the other end, then we're fine. We're going to look at that as being further away from its source, right? Like if you imagine, like you have water, like say you have like an ocean around. You have one river that travels from one side of the ocean into the land, sort of travels and sort of like stops off in like a little lake just before the other end of the ocean. So that water that's in that lake at the very bottom of that river, it might be very close to the ocean on the other end, but it's very far away from its source, right? And it traveled quite a distance away from the source that it came from. So because that's still considered far from its source, even though that same ocean starts like like 2 meters away on the other side, right? So it's considered the bottom. And he says, so because of this, this allows the system to have upper and a lower. You have up and you have down. Roish v'reglaim, you have heads and you have feet, right? But in the creation, you have all of these. You have a hierarchy in the creation. That's because of the fact that the kav comes down and travels further away from its source. Shim loikan, if it wouldn't be like that, there wouldn't have been up and down, and there wouldn't have been a head and a feet. Everything would have been just the same. He says, "V'hinai, or hazay and the smash b'toich hachulal in nechlek l'shtay b'chinas." 1 second. I am giving a share. Let me to the back, please. Okay. Says hinai or hazay ha mispashed b'toich hachulal. So now this kav that's coming down is going to now, not the kav itself is going to divide into these bechinas. It means this kav is going to create two types of bechinas as it travels down. And he says, "Achasi." The first is kinai kol ha'oiros shebetoich zeh achulal imichrech sheya bebechinas egilim aili betoich aili. Again, it's interesting. He said that it's michrech. It's necessary for as a kav travels down to make rings of ore around that mukampuni. So the question is, so if you look at diagram number 2, and this impaired diagram is there, you'll see this over there, right? You'll see the idea that as the Kav traveled down, created rings of light. And those rings of light are going to be corresponding to the Oilamas. So basically, the Kav comes down. As it travels down a little bit, creates the first ring, which the first ring will be who knows what. Like Oilamas that are above Ak, whatever it is. There's going to be an infinite number of them before you get to Ak. And then once you finally get to Ak, which is the first one on the diagram, you're going to have that ring, which is called Keser of Ak, the first sphere of Ak. Then as it travels further, you're going to have the second ring called Chochma of Ak. You travel down, Bina of Ak. And finally you get to the Malchus of Ak at the bottom, in the middle, so to speak. Then you're going to have the first circle of Atzilus, which is going to be the case of Atzilus, let's say. Really, is that there is all now at this point in Chaim, he goes into the sphere saprutim of the Partzifim. So we're going to talk about later. We're going to have it more clear later on. But he'll say that that first ring is going to be called the Keser of Atik, right? And then the second circle will be called the Chochma of Atik, of Atzilus. And finally, once you get through Atik, Malchus of Atik, then you're going to have the next circle. It's impossible to even make a diagram like this. You need to have an infinite amount of circles, literally. Then you have a circle that's called the Keser of Arich, the Chochma of Arich, and so on and so forth. Then once you're done with Arich, you're going to have the Keser of Abba, and so on and so forth. Until you get finally to the Malchus, and you finally get to the Malchus of the Malchus, and then you're done with the Tzilus. Then now you have the next Igel then, within that, which is now the Keser of Atik of Bria, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth, until you have all the circles, right? And this is another important point, that the middlemost, the centermost circle is going to be the Malchus of Asiya, which means our world. 1 second, didn't we just say that our world's at the bottom of the Kav? Now we're saying it's in the middle of the circle, so it's somewhere in the middle of the Kav. What's happening here? Well, the truth is, because like I said before, this isn't something that can be visualized. This is something that's abstract. And our world really exists on those two different planes. Our world exists on the world of a Gilim, where it's the middle circle, and also it exists in the Yosher, where it's the bottom of the Yosher. And the inyan of this is, the Leisham explains beautifully, the idea, in other words, how does our world exist in these two different realms? Right? So the realm of, you think about the whole point of the Yosher was there should be up and down. Right? That was the whole point of the Kaf. So that's the hierarchy. And we're at the bottom of that. Right? But then there's the Gilim. The Gilim are all concentric circles. So in concentric circles, right, there's no up and there's no down because they're all circles. Right? So the Leisham says that the Gilim represents the natural world. And the natural world, there's no up and no down. And all the animals, no animals rebel against Hashem's will because there's no rules in that world, right? Because the world of the Gilim is the natural world. The natural world, the lion sees a bunch of sheep, and the lion sees there's one sheep that's weak and broke his leg. The lion eats it, he kills it. Did he do an avira? He should have had compassion on it. There's no such thing. In the natural world, there is no compassion. It's, to use Darwin's Lucian, it's survival of the fittest, right? That's exactly how it works. So in a sense, all the science books that you ever read about physics and astronomy and biology and chemistry, all these things, you're learning about Igilim. That's what you're learning about. You're learning about the natural world. But then there's the world of Yosher, which the world of Yosher is the Kav. And the world of Yosher is the way Ayid looks at the world. Because the way of Yosher is that there's someone who's above me, right? You should know what's higher than you, Ayin Roya, right? There's an eye that sees, that's above me. So that means that we have responsibility for our actions, and we have to do the right thing. We have to do mitzvahs, and we can't do a virus, and we have to be much nefesh for the Torah. That's all in the Yosher. So if you think about it, take like a Yid and take like an atheist. They're both living in this world, but they're seeing it through totally different lenses. And no lens is more right than the other. Again, I'm saying this, and I don't want people to misunderstand. Right? But I mean to say that they're right as long as we're talking about a Gilim, they're right. As long as we're talking about a Gilim, it's survival of the fittest, and it's anything goes. Right? So in the world of a Gilim, they might be right. Then there's the world of Yosher, which they're not grasping at all. And that's Torah and mitzvahs. and Hashkafa and Kabbalah and everything that we learn. Right? So it's and these two people could be standing one beside the other and they're looking at the world with two totally different sets of eyes. Right? That's the Inyan of the Gilim and the Yosher. So and so our world can exist in two places at once. Because look at the way he's looking at the world and look at the way the Yid's looking at the world, right? Those two things exist at once in one place. Right? So that's the idea the way the Leshem explains, which is very beautiful. So he says, oh, so now let's just, okay, we're gonna have to stop soon because I have to go run to Marev. But let's just for a second just talk about what the Rizal said here, that it's michrich that there has to be a gilim. So why is it michrich, right? I mean, he doesn't really mean michrich because michrich means it must be that way. He doesn't really mean that because Chas v'Shulam, the Ein Sof can do whatever it wants, and all these rules, because we're already seeing rules here, right? There needs to be an empty space for creation to exist. And there needs to be a little bit of Hashem's light to go into that empty space to cause that creation to exist. You could ask why. Hashem is Kol Yuchel. He could create things out of nothing inside that empty space. Why does that or have to come in? Right? The Ein Sof it can do whatever it wants. So the word is that the Ein Sof is creating these rules and he wants it to be this way. He could have wanted a different way. Right? This is the way he wanted it to be. So whenever we see the word michrech in the Rizal, you have to know he doesn't mean actually michrech. It means in that system that the Ein Sof created with those rules and those laws of physics, kivyuchel, in that system that Hashem created, this is the way that it must be. But Hashem could have done it differently, right? So first of all, michrech doesn't mean michrech. But okay, so in the system, why in that system is a michrech there should be a gilim of or coming down? So the way that the Leishim explains this is, the Leishim says that because there's a rishimi. Rishimi means like a leftover. Because the rule is in Pnimis Torah, it's like the Zohar compares it to a snail. A snail walks and it leaves a trail of sticky stuff behind it. That sticky stuff is a part of the snail. So there's another rule in Pnimis Torah that any time that you have any or any kaili or anything moving away from one place to another, it leaves an essence or an imprint of itself or a shima of itself in that place where it left. In the sense that you have this concept like you have these haunted houses, right, where like weird things happen, and the pshat behind that is because there's actually an energy of the previous people in the house or whoever, because it could be someone who was in the house 200 years ago that had a very powerful neshama, so you feel that imprint there, right, and that imprint has effects on that place, and you have a precedent to this idea in Chazal, because Chazal say like when when a tzaddik leaves a place, there's a Rosham. That Rosham of the tzaddik remains in that place. That's why you go to Kivrei Tzaddikim. Why would you go to Kivrei Tzaddikim? What's so special about them? Because there's a Rosham of the energy of that tzaddik there, right? And the same is with all Mekayos Rosham. The same with items. Why is it that the Rebbe of Meilich's walking stick is so valuable? Because it has that energy within it, right? Because there's always an energy left over. So when the Ein Sof withdrew from the Mokom Puni and made that empty space, he left a rishimi there. There was a trace of that Ein Sof left in that space. And because the way it withdrew was from the middle and going outwards, so therefore it created an imprint of rings as it traveled out. And because of that, when the Or Ein Sof now comes back in, it's going to reawaken those rishimis. It's like if you think about it, like imagine you have like a plate or whatever, a piece of metal or whatever it is that has engraved circles into it, so concentric circles. Then you start you take it on a slant, and you start pouring water onto it. That water is going to start going into those circles and filling those circles, right? So that's the idea that that empty space had an aspect of concentric circles within it from the fact that Ein Sof removed itself in a concentric circle sort of a way, and therefore now that the Or comes back in, it's going to reactivate those concentric circles and create the Olam HaGilim. That's the way that the Lishim understands it. And he says, "Va'amushal b'zei," and the way to understand this is that Or Sfiras Keser he igel echad. That the Keser, and here he doesn't say the Keser of what, Like Pashas we're talking about, like you can see in the diagram number 2 over there from this parents, it's the case of Ak that we're talking about, of Udum Kadman. So first it comes the eagle of case, right? B'toicha Yigaleicha Acher. Then there's going to be another circle within it. V'Yisfiras Chachma. That's Chachma. Chal Derech Zeh Atash Mesh Spheres. That's how it's going to go until you have 10 concentric circles, being all 10 spheres of Ak. Shem Aser Spheres. Here it says Arich. If you want to learn Arich, then that would mean he skipped Ak and he went straight to Atzilus, right? And then so again, like I said, sometimes the convolution is still a little bit choppy, but right? So let's say Atzilus, right? So first with the 10 concentric circles of the case of Atzilus, right? Then there's going to be another 10 spheres within. Arich means Keser, by the way. Remember, this is homework for people that aren't familiar with it yet. Memorize, please, the names of the Partzifa and which sphere they refer to. You can see on the Erechim chart, which I sent out. If you look at just the first few lines there at the top, you'll see the spheres and the Partzifim. So please memorize that because we don't want to get stuck each time that we see the word Arich or Abba or Ima, right? We should know which spheres those refer to. Right, so first about 10 spheres of Arich, which is Keser, and then another 10 circles within that. That makes the spheres the Abba, which are the 10 spheres of Abba. Ali b'toich Ali, one within the other. The Eagle b'toich Eagle, one circle within the other. Ad Siyam kol Protei Atzilus to the whole Atzilus. Then of course it continues. The Bria Tzir and the Siyam. L'chol Eagle ma'ali yesh or makef ailav Eagle gam kan kamohi. Kamoisa, and each of these Igilim has an or makef around it, in the sense that now we've doubled the number of concentric circles because there's the Kaili, there's the circles themselves, which are going to be like Kaili, and they contain or. We should look at them also not as circles, but rather as like hula hoops, right? Which contain or within them because it's Kaili and or, right? And then there's going to be an or that's around them too, because everything, there's another cloud in Pneumiya that we have to know that everything has or Pneumiya and or Makif. So in the sense that there's, just like I just said, everything has or within it, so too everything has or around it, because the or doesn't all fit inside the kaili. So just like we have our nefesh and neshama, which is inside our bodies, then the body is the kaili, then we have the chaya, which is an aura around the person, and the yechida is everything else around the person, right? So too everything will have an or pnimin or makif. So there's going to be an or makif around those agilim too, right? So he says. So yeah, so you have all those agilim. Then his v'abechina shniya, and the second bechina is, I just finished the paragraph, right? Kihinai be'emtza kol ha'atzilus hazeh, in the middle of this whole atzilus, ha'ugol, which is around, is pasha derech kav yusha. There's the kav that comes in. Bechinas or, which is an or, and of course we know that it's kaili too, right? Digma so eagle mamish rak shehi beyosher. It's like the eagle itself, except that it's a line. It's like a circle itself, except it's a line. What is that supposed to mean, right? So this is going to be something we're going to have to go save for next week. Because I want to show you this is one of the diagram. This is the other diagram that I sent out to show you that the kav, even though the kav is one thin line, but then the other oilamas in the kav. Okay, so now we have the gilim, all the spheres and everything on Batzifim. Around the kav, they're also all the oilamas will be built up around the kav. So you have the kav in the middle. Then Ulam Kadman is like a tube, like a cylinder around the kav. Then Atzilus is going to be like another tube around that. And Bria is going to be like another tube around that. And Atzilus is going to be another tube around that. If we look at that diagram that I sent out, that the last one, the JPEG, which shows that there. If you look on the left side shows the oilamas, right? So it's like, some people call it in the shum, they call it the birthday cake, because that's sort of what it looks like, because it has like these different layers, one to the other. So that's what it means. It's like the gilim, except it's in the yosher, because there's going to be these cylinders around that kav building outwards, right? So it's not just going to be a kav; it's going to be a kav with all these things around it, right? So if you look at that from bird's eye view, what does it look like? A gilim, right? It's like the gilim, except it's the yosher. You'll see that there's one big difference, because imagine like looking at that from bird's eye view. You're going to see that the kav is in the middle, and the ak is around it. Then the tzilus is around the ak, so it's the opposite of the gilim. Because in the gilim, you had that the keser was the outermost, and chach was more innermost, and our world is in the middle. But in the Yosher, our world is on the very outside of that. We're going to show this with a diagram next week because we don't really have time now. But anyway, that's the idea. And now in this Yosher, there's going to be spheres and pratzifim. So you're going to have an Atzilus. Again, he's skipping ahead in time because there won't be an Arach Anpin at the beginning. Just saying like the way it looks now. There's be an Arach Anpin, Ba'am Ve'imah, Zav V'nik, there's the pratzifim, the Kilim B'Yosher. And that those are all going to be in the Yosher, meaning around the Kav. The Bechina Zois Hashniya Kura Torah es Udam. This is why the Torah calls the Udam Tzem Elokim, that the person is created with Tzem Elokim. Ki Kav Yushim is Pasha Der Kavim, because that Kav comes down. Then you have these cylinders around the Kav, and those cylinders have a right, left, and center. So you'll see, like in that diagram, the diagram that from the distant pair, it's the second one. It doesn't show. It only shows Ak, right? So it doesn't show the other things mislabish around that Ak. But you see, there's a Keser, Chachma, Bina, all in 3 Kavim, and 3 Kavim is like a person, because a person's body is in 3 kavim, right? You have the head in the middle and the chest, and so on. They have the arms on the sides, right? So that's what it means. The person's created with tzalem like is created according to this structure. Ki kav yishmas pasha derech kavim v'kamat kol sefer hazoyer v'atikinim ayna medabram ela b'zei hayosha. And all of the Kabbalah, the entire sefer hazoyer and tikinei zoyer, except in a few select places, is not talking about a gilim when it talks about yosha. Kosh hezbar lakam bez Hashem b'ruchi. Like we're going to explain as Hashem in the future. So basically, the idea is that because if it would be talking about the Gilim, it would be a science textbook, like I said, because the Gilim is the natural world. So it's the Zohar is not a science textbook, right? So because it's talking about the Yosher, it's talking about a different reality, right? And both those realities are a part of the entire reality. Okay, so we'll stop here for now. And I know that was very deep. If you want to listen to this year over or like dwell on some of these concepts, like some of these concepts could make like an amazing meditation, just to think about them and try to understand them. So if you want to do that, feel free, or just go over it and think about them as you see them in the text. And as Hashem, please for next week try to memorize, if you don't know them yet, which partzifim are associated with which spheres, which is the beginning of the Erechim chart, the very top, right? So you can look at that. And maybe I'll send out an English one too, for people that might have an easier time with that. Bez Hashem. And then next week we'll continue. Okay, kol tov everyone.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Good night. My pleasure. Hashem will continue next week. Kol tov.